This is Emma Clark here for the Brooklyn Public Library. I'm here with Marty Needelman, the Co-Executive Director and Chief Counsel at Brooklyn Legal Services Corporation A and a longtime Williamsburg resident. So, hello. Thank you for agreeing to talk to us today and be recorded for the project. It's for Our Streets, Our Stories. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how long you've lived here and been working in Williamsburg?
Actually, I'm a newcomer. I came in 1969. Right from law school. I was a Vista volunteer lawyer, and I had grown up in East New York. My first 18 years on the same block in East New York. White flight, we were forced out. Lived 2 years in Canarsie. Then I lived in Brooklyn my whole life. At that point, went to Boston University Law School after Brooklyn College, and loved Boston. It was the 60s, and I thought I was going to end up in Boston. Wanted to do public interest stuff. There was no jobs available. Joined Vista, Volunteers in Service to America, as a lawyer, and got into and I was going to go. I thought I was going to go to Texas or Oklahoma, and then come back to Boston, which I loved. I ended up in a special program they had, which was 2 years rather than 1 year, and we interviewed the people who had been in the program, the 5 lawyers who had been in the program before that, and one guy, Arnie Rothbaum, ended up being my mentor, had a great description of what he was doing at that time. So I joined there. I decided to come to Williamsburg for 2 years. I've been here ever since.
Wow. And tell us a little bit about growing up in Brooklyn, since you've been here for your whole life.
Well, it was my block, Alabama Avenue in East New York, was like a little village. It was at that time. It was all working class and poor Jewish people. Mm-hmm. The Jews originally came to Lower East Side. And then the next generation, the business people moved, and the more middle class mainstream Jews, non-Hasidic Jews, moved to Williamsburg, right across the bridge. The poorer Jews, the working class and lower income Jews, moved to East New York and Brownsville. So my family moved to East New York, and we lived in the same block for 18 years, and it was like a village. My elementary school was a block from my house. And then, but it was, people were super friendly. Everybody knew each other, been there for ages, and so it was, you walked down the block and people, you knew everybody, and it was like a village. It was very, so that when white flight happened, when Puerto Ricans started moving in, and all the whites, we were the last white family on our block. Mm-hmm. It was very touching to me because I felt like I lost my home, my town. And so I realized that that had an impact on my future life in terms of defending people's right to stay and trying to preserve communities, which is what happened here. And the fact is that after I moved to Williamsburg, I've been in Williamsburg ever since. I live on the same block in Williamsburg for the last since 1972. Mm-hmm. So it's 43 years. It's the same block, and been in Williamsburg the whole time. So it defined a lot of my life and my work by those experiences as a young person, and till I was 18 years old.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything particularly vivid that you remember or unique about growing up in the Jewish community in Brooklyn?
Just that it was very supportive. Like I said, it was a village. Most people in those days, the world has changed a lot since then, but in those days, most people had come from Europe, prior generations. My parents were both born in the United States, but my grandparents were from Europe, from Russia. And so everybody there was no conservative or Reform Jews, it was all Orthodox, but mostly non-observant Orthodox. So like us, we kept kosher in the house, but we ate Chinese food outside. we kept certain holidays, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Passover, Pesach, but nothing else, not the Sabbath, because my father was a postal worker. He was a clerk in the main post office. And so he had to work on the Sabbath. So we were not Sabbath observers, and we didn't follow other Jewish holidays like Shavuos or certain other holidays. So it was just a very, and many people, I'd say most of the people were like that. And we went to Hebrew day school. We went to public school. We went to Hebrew day schools afterwards, and it was a very warm and support. Like I said, it was like a village. People were very supportive and united in a lot of ways. Also, neighbors, and very neighborly and nice.
And tell us a little bit about what you do here at Brooklyn Legal Services.
Well, when I started out, as I said, I was a Vista volunteer, and the reason why I was pulling because Arnie Rothbaum, at the time, like I said, my predecessor and my mentor was working with parents' associations and community groups in the struggle for community control of schools. The Ocean Hill-Brownsville days, this is 1969, and it was the height of that struggle over community control. It was part of a much larger movement afoot, civil rights and community control, and very successful, and was involved in organizing, and it wasn't, we did legal work, but it was also part of larger struggles. And so then I did that for about 3 years, exclusively education-related work with those groups. And then the world changed. The city accommodated those things. There was elections for community school boards and things like that. So it kind of changed and it kind of petered out in a successful way. So then, in around the early 70s, it switched, and I worked with community groups. So the next phase of what they were involved with was the struggle to get local workers into the construction trades. There was a massive amount of construction going on. So, for example, in 1976, Woodhull Hospital, 500 units opened up. The Verizon, whatever it was called in those days, Bell Telephone, had a new major building opened up, was constructed and opened up. There was a lot of new housing being built in the early 70s as a result of the Democratic administrations that placed fairly funded housing. So there were three developments. Well, three new developments. 1,500 apartments were constructed in that period of time near the Williamsburg waterfront in South Williamsburg. So there were a lot of construction jobs available. In those days, the construction jobs were unionized, and they were all white, Italian, and Irish workers. And it was father to son hand-me-downs. So in order to get the jobs, we had to demonstrate on the site, stop construction very often, and organized and mobilized to get people on the construction sites locally here, and then they were merged into the union. And so that was a very successful campaign. It was wars, but it was very successful. There were demonstrations where people got arrested and stuff like that. And actually that was in conjunction with Fight Back, which was doing similar things in Manhattan. It was actually a Brooklyn Fight Back, and we did it at some other sites. Sorry. Then the construction was done, the wars were over in that stage, and then in 1973, I got called. I forget how I got called, but I got called to a tenant association group on Division Avenue, Division right off of Bedford Avenue in Williamsburg, and they were complaining that the Hasidic landlord was trying to get them out of the buildings. At that time, the Hasidic community had begun to develop and really was starting to, in South Williamsburg, which is actually very between here. Division is one block past Broadway to the Navy Yard, to the river. And they were growing, and they were pushing out what had become Latino families there. And so this is like 115 Division Avenue. So I go to the meeting, and I tell them, and I bring back my background, which is the organizing legal stuff together, and we talk about it. I said, well, how are we going to do it in a fight? But then I got pneumonia, and I was out of the office for about a week, and I came to the building, and the building was empty. In that week, it had all happened. So I said to myself, I'll never let that happen again. And again, I guess it reverberated with my own history of anti-displacement, or being displaced myself for other reasons. And then the next two buildings, similar things were happening in the next two buildings. One is right across the street, 108 Division, and then 104 Division. And we had, that was the beginning of my doing this work. And about 6 months after I began working with the first 108 Division Avenue, Barbara Schliff, who joined a community organization called Los Sures, the Southside United for Housing, joined it and participated with me, and was the organizer in conjunction with me. We worked together in that building. That was the first building we worked on. The first building we worked on together. She's been meeting with the tenants in that building every month since 1974. And what happened was, it was the beginning of a lot of stuff that we won. It was a battle against a Hasidic Hasidic-related landlord who actually was in this building. Before we owned this building right here, we had offices. We came in 1968, and there were a lot of private offices here, and he had his real estate office here, and we had organized the tenants, and fighting. We brought court cases, and so I'll give you some materials about what our strategies generally are. But it's an economic wars: hold back the rent and bring affirmative cases, and then fight the non-payment cases. Take advantage of the non-functionality of the courts against landlords, as opposed to what's going on now otherwise, which is landlords taking care of forcing tenants to pay because of tenants. And it was a memorable moment because I was on the third floor, or I was on the second floor at the time here, or third floor, and he was on the fourth floor, and he invited me upstairs. And I knew him very well, the landlord, Wolf Ganoth, who passed away, and a survivor of the Holocaust himself. And he said, "This is 1974. I offer you $4,000. We'll drop the case, just get it done." And $4,000 in 1974. So I said, "I can't take money myself." I said, I'll offer it to the tenants." He says, "No, it's not for the tenants, it's for you." And his secretary is saying, "Take it, Marty, take it." And I said, "I can't do it." So he said, the next day or a day later, a guy walks into the building and throws a Molotov cocktail, and half the building's burnt down. Oh my gosh. And a week after that, it happens again. And all but one tenant remains in the building. So I called the FBI, told them what happened, and an FBI agent came down here. And he said, "What should I ask him?" And he spoke to him, and nothing happened. But one person stayed in the building. And we brought the court case, and we got the court ordered. We got the first appointed 7A. There's a provision of the law. It was actually a dead letter statute that allows for 1/3 of the tenants in a building to seek the appointment of an administrator, court-appointed administrator, to run a building and bar the landlord from entering the building and possession of the building, if you can show that this hazardous conditions exist. Serious hazard. Obviously, the courts are reluctant to do it, but here was really a big thing. And so we got the 7A appointed, and that case had been pending before the fires, and this kind of like clarified it. And we got some funding, and Los Suarez, the community organization, lent some money. They had a building survival fund, and they lent some money to the 7A administration. So the other part of the war was, the statute had been started in the 50s. There was a guy named Jesse Gray who tried to organize Harlem, and a Harlem rent strike. After that was resolved, they passed the state passed the law allowing for tenants to bring these cases to try to prevent them from having to do rent strikes. Mm-hmm. But only one guy, Bernie Hamp, in the Lower East Side, did these cases. And it was really a dead letter because you couldn't find administrators who were willing to do it because there was no money involved. It was 3% of the rents, and the rents are low. However, what we did is we asked the court to appoint the head of the community organization, the head of Low Service, who was and you had to be a lawyer or a real estate broker or a notary or a what's it called? You had to be a licensed broker or attorney or a CPA. Okay. So none of them wanted to do it, but the head of the community organization, Low Service, was a lawyer. And so we asked the court to appoint him. The court declined to do so. The court insisted upon appointing. They didn't want to have our guy appointed. Mm-hmm. So step two was when the 7A administrator was appointed, who was not our guy, we didn't pay rent, and we did a rent strike against him. And he can bring a court case against the tenants for rent, but he had no money. It would have to come out of his pocket because there was no money in the tenant in the 7A. So he backed. He withdrew, and we got our guy. And that guy participated actually in fixing up the building, restoring it, and the tenants moved back in. Many of them had got into new public housing that was being built at the same time, so their children came in. But many of them to this day are people who were involved in those struggles early on. And it became and then what happened was it began a trend. 7A, now a 7A administrator collects the rents, but the rents can only be used for repair and maintenance of the building. Not for taxes, not for old debts, not for mortgages, not for profit. So if the landlord wanted to retain the building, they had to pay the taxes out of their own pocket or pay those old bills. And in those days, no matter how wealthy these landlords were, and it's still somewhat true today with the slumlords, that they hate to pay money out of their own pocket. And in those days, there was so many buildings, they just let it go. You let it go. The city took it for tax foreclosure. The city didn't want it, so the city then created a program called the Tenant Interim Release Program, or the 7A Interim Release Program, where they leased the building to the 7A administrator. The city owned at that point, and they continued the 7A administration. And then the city developed a program of converting these to low-income co-ops under a state statute called the Private Housing Finance Law. Housing Development Fund Corporations, co-ops built exclusively for persons of low income. And and then they sold the apartments for $250, the shares for the apartments in this co-op for $250 an apartment purchase price. And they were able to maintain very low rents. To this day, the rents are maintained low and continue, because it shows you how much money is involved in the profit in these buildings. Without having to make a profit, you can keep rents low and maintain the buildings in reasonable condition. And to this day they have. And then the same thing happened next door. There it was not, she didn't burn, the landlady did not burn the building down, but she did everything possible. And we won that case also, same thing, 7A, and she was out. And she was a wild person. My wife and my family, once on Yom Kippur, you go to, or during the Jewish, that period of time, you walk to the water and you can throw away your sins symbolically. And the water is near where the concentration of the Hasidic community is. So she saw us going that day, me and my wife and my two young kids. And she started screaming at us, and a crowd formed, and we were almost violent. And people called the police and stuff like this. And stuff, but we had to watch. Our friends surrounded us and watched us out. But that was the kind of things we were going. But we took that building. That was 104 Division, which Barbara still works with to this day, likewise. And that began the trend. And we've done lots of buildings over the years. In those days, it was slumlords, or the Hasidim trying to get the Latinos out for other Hasidim. But as I said, the slumlords would buy a building, scare the landlords out on the south side, where it was not the Hasidic community, it was something else. The mainstream Jewish community had moved out and were replaced by mostly Latinos coming in. But, and this is a trend that was throughout larger areas, including most of New York City, probably even a larger place with that. The brokers slumlords would buy the building, scare the landlords out. The Puerto Ricans are coming, and it's going to be worth nothing. Buy the building cheap, sell it to the next slumlord. They'd collect the rents and recover their investment in 2 years, and sell the building and make a 50% profit on top of that. Recover their investment and get 50%, and then sell it to the next slumlord. And they would paint the hallways and say, "We're going to be okay. It's going to be a new world here." Do the same exact thing, and then finally they burned the building down, which was very common. Bronx's burning was a pattern. Here in Williamsburg, we resisted that and took the buildings away from the landlords. So that during that period of time, this goes on 70s and 80s and really to 90s. With Los Surias and other community organizations in other parts of Williamsburg and Greenpoint, there were over 120 buildings that were taken and made into HDFC co-ops as a result of these struggles, which continue, and the co-ops continue today. In addition to that, so that was 80% of the work I've done over that time with Los Surias, and then with St. Nick's neighborhood, St. Luke's Alliance now, it's called something a little different, in East Williamsburg and in South Greenpoint. In North Greenpoint, there's North Brooklyn Development Corporation. In the north side, there was People's Firehouse and a group called NAG. It was originally Neighbors Against Garbage. Now it's Neighbors Aligned for Good Growth. But that coalition, and we've expanded to Bushwick over the years, Bushwick Housing Independence Project. So that was the work. That was the bulk of the work. And then working with those tenants associations and the co-ops to manage the buildings with the organizers. And there were a lot of logistical, legal issues and substantive issues, just mechanical issues in terms of managing the building. And our goal has always been with tenants associations or with these co-ops, transparency and collective decision making. Reports with everything. All the business is done at monthly meetings. Rents are collected, rent strike or co-op at the meetings. Receipts are given out at the meetings. Reports are given at the meetings. Checks are signed at the meetings, only approved by the group. And that all the tenants, not a board of directors, but all the tenants participate in majority rules. So that's the theory and theme. And sometimes it's nothing is perfect, it doesn't work out exactly that way. But that's the goal, and that's how we try to do it. So that's So the bulk of the work was tenant associations and then co-ops because of those issues. And then some of them more recently have had problems because they've gone up in value tremendously. So what people paid $250 for are now worth $300,000, and there's pressures for them to sell to people on the side. And in some situations, a couple of people have taken over the building and then try to make a profit off of that. We've had to take the buildings back and all those struggles. That's another thing we did. The third thing we do is representing community coalitions, going back to that period of time, and over all kinds of issues, rezonings, environmental stuff. We've worked with coalitions over the years, and that's another major part of the thing I did. But and fair housing is one of the major issues that's affected this area and continues to. And one of the first cases that we brought was the Williamsburg Fair Housing Committee challenge to the city's behavior in this respect, the shocking behavior in this area, strict racial quotas in public housing favoring the Hasidic Jewish community, and the Jewish community and the Hasidic community. So when the Jewish community ran out of the South Side, white flight, the mainstream Jewish community, the projects that were built, public housing right over here, and nearby, this is Jonathan Williams' houses, and then Independence houses, together about 1,800 apartments. We found out that was 1964 when it opened up. We found out in 1976 when we reviewed the situation that they had been rented up 75% white and maintained strictly 75% white. It was really Jewish through that period. It became a refuge for the Jews that were moving out of the neighborhood, as opposed to other areas where they moved to Los Angeles or the or Long Island. Here, many of them stayed here because they got these great apartments, and it was segregated. It was in 1976. So the Latino community, basically the Puerto Rican community, which has changed over the years and became more Dominican and now heavy influx of Mexicans and others. But at the time it was all Puerto Rican. They came really after World War II. There was some always there, as was the Hasidic community. But really the Hasidic community and the Puerto Rican community both really came in large numbers for different reasons after World War II. The Hasidic community escaping the remnants of the Jewish community in Europe. Some of the survivors came. And then the Puerto Rican community came post-war jobs. They worked. They got jobs here along the waterfront. A lot of construction, and they came in really after World War II. And they kind of grew together after World War II. The Hasidic community has dramatic patterns of childbirth because of religious rules and otherwise. They have the maximum number of children. So every family has 12 or 13 kids or no kids. But if they have children, they have the maximum number they can have. And so there's a mega growth that way. The Latino community has grown by immigration. So Puerto Rican community grew, and then replaced by a major influx of Dominicans, and then, as I said, the Mexicans more recently. So, but they have grown together. The Puerto Rican and Latino community is larger than the Hasidic community, but the Hasidic community votes as a bloc. I mean, part of the issue with the Hasidic community is that 80% of the population is below 18 because it's the child growth. So that their voting bloc is significantly small. The adult population is significantly smaller than the Latino population. However, the Hasidic community votes as a bloc. It's led by the religious leaders and the secular leaders that dictate how the voting is going. Block votes. I'll give you 5,000 votes or 4,000 votes. I'll give your opponent 4,000, 5,000 votes. And I'm not a Democrat or Republican. I'm not conservative or liberal. I can support a gay black woman over a Jewish guy anytime. But here's what I need you to do. And nobody wants to lose 8,000 or 10,000 votes, not in the city, not in the state, and as a result, not federally. When Jimmy Carter ran for president, or against Ford, the Hasidic community did not vote till 4 p.m. that afternoon. They held off until the negotiations were settled, and then they finally voted for Carter. And that's gigantic political pressure. So, racial quotas, starting in '64. But New York City, the government, not some private landlords, is strict. And the waiting list has always been over 90% non-white, usually about 55% black and 40% Latino. So anyhow, so we brought litigation to federal court in '76. We discovered in the new house, this is because there was new housing going up, 1,500 units. Again, 75% new racial quotas in '76. And there was one project, 500 apartments, New York City public housing, 60% Hasidic, 30% Latino, 10% African American. Every floor was exactly the same format. A, B, C, D lines. Hasidic, E, F, Latino, G black. Despite the thing, and it was maintained that way. So that was something. So we brought the lawsuit. We stopped the further development of that. We got a court order barring it, and that was 1976, 77. In 1991, the world changed. And we go back to evaluate because it appeared that new housing is going up along the waterfront. 11 city had a new urban renewal development along the waterfront. 11 sites. Every single one was given over to Hasidic developers for Hasidic only purposes, either housing for Hasidim only, with market rate housing so that the Latinos couldn't afford it anyhow, yeshivas or dormitories, housing for Hasidim, and things like that. So we brought a lawsuit challenging that. We also reviewed the prior situation, the prior court orders, and lo and behold, despite a federal court order, the city maintained that. Remember that development 60-30-10? Between 1976 and 1991 remained 60-30-10. They violated a federal court order, maintained strict racial and discrimination. So anyhow, so over the years after that, we worked with the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund. There was numerous contempt cases through 2005 until at least the city's part of it was ended. These projects, as of 2011, the project remained, all the public housing in this area remained, every single large apartment is occupied by white families, mainly Hasidim. And collectively, only slightly less than 50% of the apartments are occupied by whites. So there's been some change, but the waiting list has been over 90% throughout the whole period of time, non-white. So it's bizarre and shocking. What happens is Hasidic families move in. In the old days, it was illegal, but then the ones that remained there were legal. They have their children stay legal occupants, and they move out and leave with their children, generation to generation. There's some hocus pocus also with that. So that continues to be an issue. Anyway, so we did a lot of litigation about that, and there are other things like the Williamsburg waterfront in 2005. We negotiated, represented the coalition that negotiated a settlement with the city. No litigation, but representation of the groups in demonstrations and negotiations with the city to maximize the amount of affordable housing that was available. And we're now involved in mega litigation involving the Broadway Triangle area, which is a large urban renewal area at the intersection of Bed-Stuy and Williamsburg, because once again, the Bloomberg administration gave over 60% of the city-owned territory to a Hasidic coalition with Assemblyman Vito Lopez, who was a very powerful political figure at the time, the head of the Kings County Democratic Party, and zoned it in a way that would only accommodate the needs of the Hasidic community. Low rise, they don't use the elevators on the Sabbath, and just also limiting the rezoning to only the Williamsburg side. Williamsburg remains only 5% black, despite a lot of blacks living in public housing in the area, a lot of public housing. So there's obviously no African Americans living outside of public housing in Williamsburg, Greenpoint. Less than 5% black. Bed-Stuy, right across the border, all within the Broadway Triangle renewal area, was over 75%, really close to 90% African American for most of that period of time. Recently, it's 75%. They only rezoned the Williamsburg side. They had some kind of excuses for doing so. But the real reason was they give 50% preference for affordable housing to be built in these areas to residents of the local area. In this case, Community Board 1, favoring the Hasidic community. If they had included Community Board 3 also, which is Bed-Stuy, it would have diluted the amount of apartments they would have gotten. So all this craziness going on in litigation. But at one time we actually came together with the Hasidic community because the city had planned to kind of deal with the when they closed the garbage sites that they dumped when they dumped all the garbage in Staten Island. In Staten Island, after they built the Verrazano Bridge, they finally closed down the landfill in Staten Island where all the garbage in New York City was dumped. So they had to find out, what do we do with the garbage now? So the plan was to have a single garbage incinerator in each borough. And they were going to start at Williamsburg, of course, in Brooklyn. And the Brooklyn incinerator was going to be a 57-story incinerator right at the Navy Yard, right next to public housing. So the Hasidic community and Latino community came together, and we marched over the Williamsburg Bridge to City Hall and all kinds of stuff. But it was a great thing. It came together, and they forced the city not to do it. So stuff like that. So that's so it's a combination. I did a lot of press stuff also to get attention to these things and help work with. So it's I always say we're like Wall Street lawyers in a way, because we don't just do the litigation. We're in-house counsel to the groups as well. We work very closely with the groups.
What would you say the majority of issues that you're dealing with now, as opposed to sort of decades ago or at the beginning, are?
Well, unfortunately, like I said, the Broadway Triangle is a very active case with it. So unfortunately, it continues to be issues like that. But rezonings, displacement pressures created by it used to be the slumlords. Now it's gentrification and huge displacement pressures. So the rezoning allowing for the creation of market rate housing, even if you have a significant amount, 20, 30% of affordable housing, A, the definition of affordable is not so affordable to our communities, but B, the construction of market rate housing does not meet that demand. It creates the demand. It becomes a magnet. And huge displacement pressure. So it's a war. So it's just like with the slumlords, but now it's a war against landlords. If they can get $5,000 for a two-bedroom apartment, or they can get $2,500 for a two-bedroom apartment, and the people are paying a legal rent, stabilized rent of and struggling to pay $743, they'll kill to get the people out. And that's what's happening. And so we've had, and a lot of it's criminality. I'll show you a op-ed piece we did for the Daily News recently, last month, that says that there's a massive amount of criminal behavior that is being treated as housing cases, but actually it's totally criminal behavior, threatening people, burning buildings down, all that kind of stuff. So it's a war, and we continue to do. That's a massive amount of work. Is also representing, working with the organizers, continually working with the tenants, and then the co-ops remain a major issue. Also, sustaining them and dealing with all the issues that they have. So it's a lot of the same stuff.
What has kept you coming back to this work?
Well, I think, like I said, my childhood, having lost my community and not wanting to have to see it happen to others, the successes, it's very empowering. My career, I've been blessed because I've had situations where really it's not individual low-income people who have no power. It's showing people who are low-income coming together and having power and winning the battles, and the affirmative battles, and not just and not allowing the courts to dominate, empowering people to force landlords and the rest of the world to realize that they have to deal with them. And unfortunately, that continues with the new mayor, where unfortunately he talks a good game, but a lot of what's happened continues to be the same stuff at the street level. Now, I don't know if it's non-functionality he can't control at the street level. A lot of the people who work in the city are carryovers from old administrations and old visions. The Bloomberg vision was benign neglect. Don't help poor people, let them move out of the neighborhoods, and then let's get rich people in who pay higher taxes and good for the city's economy and vibrant New York City. Build new parks, but not for the people who live there, but for the people who are going to live there. And unfortunately, that continues to be very much the case, despite claims of otherwise. And also, there's been a lot of attention to de Blasio reaching out to the Orthodox, the Haredi, the Hasidic Jewish community, and again, trying to work with them, trying to get their support. There's been articles in the New York Times about that recently, also about the whole circumcision thing, but they said it was a much larger issue in terms of him trying to accommodate and make friends with the Hasidic community. And unfortunately, I believe that this is part of what's going on here as well. We also are involved in major battles now with the city under the Bloomberg administration, but unfortunately it continues today. The city has abandoned daycare centers and senior centers in the neighborhood, allowing them to not renewing leases that are city names, and allowing them to be forced out, which is the infrastructure of our community. And part of it was the old benign neglect situation. But now, the Blasio administration, I don't know what it is, because it's shocking. It's inconsistent with what he claims is the behavior. But the two buildings that we're talking about that we work with very closely, 211 Ainsley, Swinging 60 Senior Center. It's been there for over 40 years. And Small World Daycare Center at the same place. Who owns it? Hasidic people connected to the leadership, the Hasidic community. And Noe Shostin Daycare Center, which has been involved, which I've been involved with since early 1970s. And it was really great daycare, nurturing. It's community-centered. It's part of the community and sustains the community and provides all that, enables low-income people to work and enables kids to be taken care of in a loving environment, a nurturing, neighborhood-based environment. Also, that building is owned by the Hasidic people who are probably connected to the Hasidic leadership who are connected to the Plaza. So that's the only thing I can think of in terms of why the administration has not moved to protect these places and allow them to be going. We're fighting that we're going to win. We always win, but the question is how much of a battle is it?
Yeah. I think we're coming up towards half an hour. Is there anything else you want to add we haven't covered?
Not really. I mean, also the block where I live, I've lived there for 42 years. That's become a new village. Everybody knows each other. And despite the pressures elsewhere, most of the buildings on my block and somewhere in the surrounding area are owned by nonprofits or HDFCs. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the people have remained, or their children are there for ages. So it's like the village kind of environment, and supportive and nurturing and friendly. So it's been a very good part of my life as well.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with us.
Not at all. It's my pleasure.